All right, cool. Okay, so today we're kind of continuing on with the endocrine system. So we'll talk about the other glands we haven't talked about yet. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about just a couple disorders related to the hypothalamus and pituitary, like the two glands we talked about last time. So one of those is called diabetes insipidus. So diabetes insipidus is when somebody is not releasing ADH for some reason. Okay, and so usually this is due to damage to the hypothalamus or the posterior pituitary. This could be a tumor or some other kind of trauma that happens. And so this leads to super intense thirst and lots of urination, life-threatening amounts of urination, just liters and liters of fluid per day if it's not treated. And so the kind of the diabetes, the name diabetes, this relates to what were type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, right? But the common thread is just the urination part, right? Between all those three types of diabetes is that patients urinate a lot. This one has nothing to do with glucose, right? Diabetes insipidus is just about ADH and about urine output. But with all types of diabetes, patients urinate a lot. And so when they're first figuring out what all these things were, that was like the common thread. So they called them all diabetes. The wild part before that we really had like blood tests was that diabetes mellitus is the one that we're used to thinking about with blood sugar. And mal means honey, and insipidus means tasteless. So literally the doctors would taste a patient's urine to diagnose which type of diabetes it was. Is it sweet urine or is it tasteless urine? If it's tasteless urine, then it's diabetes insipidus, right? If it's got sugar in it, then it's diabetes mellitus. And then still underneath diabetes mellitus, there's type 1 and type 2, right? Both of those are related to blood sugar, but different origins. And we'll talk about that more in the end of the semester. But just be thankful that you're not practicing medicine 150 years ago because you'd be drinking people's pee. So, okay, questions on that? Yeah, Ava? Oh yeah, so I mean the just with your blood sugar is the typical thing, or you can just do like actually measure it in the urine as well. You can just taste or not taste, put a dipstick there, and you guys will actually do that later this semester. You'll do, in the urinalysis lab, you'll test your own urine for glucose and for other things, but you just put a little stick in there, and then it has little things that are just measuring all the different components in it. So yeah, you can taste it if you want. I mean, but yeah, yeah, just try it out. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, other questions on that? Okay, and then pituitary tumor. Kind of, I mentioned my friend who had one as well, but it's somewhat of a common place to get a tumor in terms of brain tumors go. And so this can lead to overproduction of individual hormones or all hormones, or it can lead to overproduction of a certain one and then underproduction of other ones. Just kind of depends on which cells are the ones that are part of the tumor. And then, as we've talked about a few times already, that tunnel vision is super common because it's pushing right down in the optic chiasm where the optic nerve tracks cross over there. So, okay, questions on any of those? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so remember the pituitary sits directly above the optic chiasm. So that's where those the parts of the medial parts of our retina, those neurons cross right at that point. So the pituitary is right above that crossing point. So when you get a tumor right there, it pushes down on that crossing point, which then knocks out your ability to see peripherally because that's all that light hits the medial sides of your retina when with your vision. So yeah. Other questions on that? Okay, so let's do a quick clicker question here. What's the largest pure endocrine organ? So that means it's not exocrine, it's not neuroendocrine, it's just purely endocrine. Go ahead, chat with your team about it for a sec and send it in when you're ready.
I'm gonna join their team. I decided.
You say that again?
Said I decided I'm just gonna join their team.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect.
you know.
Yeah, you can talk to your mom. Yeah. What's your profession, Julie? Are you?
Attorney.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Really?
But I've
more in like the legal
Oh,
HR side of
okay.
things.
Cool.
So,
My son has type 1 diabetes, so
well, I just
Um,
left Northridge just with the diabetes.
really?
Center.
Wow,
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat.
Yeah.
And my dissertation.
Planning the lion, a little stuffed animal.
Oh, okay.
Does he have one of
No,
those?
he doesn't have that. He doesn't have Medtronic products. He has Tandem
Okay.
and then what's the other glucose monitor one? I'm blanking on it right now. Tandem for the pump, but then Dexcom.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's got Dexcom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay.
in my dissertation research, I use Medtronics for looking at changes in blood glucose tracking with exercise.
So you're familiar.
Yeah, I inserted a lot of those things. There was an older version of like the iPro 2 or something. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
continue to enhance.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. Thanks.
What's your dog doing? Good?
A little better. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she's still pooping all over the place. Yeah. So it's a slow process. Yeah. All right, go ahead and send it in if you haven't there. Okay. What do we got? So, yeah, so most of you are saying E, at least about 3/4 of you are saying E. So the thyroid gland, and that is true. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about first. So, all right, so the thyroid gland, this one sits right in front of our trachea. Okay, right below the larynx, so kind of right below our voice box, right where like the Adam's apple would be. It's kind of right below that. Okay, and so it's got two separate lobes, kind of one on each side here, and it has lots and lots of blood flow because it's just constantly releasing hormones, and so we need direct access to the blood so we can put those hormones in the blood. And there's two primary types of cells. So there's follicular cells, which are the ones, sorry, those little things got messed up. They produce something called thyroglobulin. And thyroglobulin is what is pretty much the precursor to the thyroid hormones that are going to be released later. And so those are the ones kind of around the chamber, the follicular cells, okay? And then we have the parafollicular cells, which are between the follicles, and those are the ones that produce calcitonin. Okay, so calcitonin is another hormone related to bone mass density and calcium control. But thyroglobulin is kind of this precursor to the thyroid hormones. It's more of a stable form that it can be stored in. And then when we're ready to release it as the thyroid hormones, it gets converted one more time and then gets released into the blood. So we can kind of see these different cells here. So the A is pointing to the parafollicular cells, whereas B would be the follicular cells. So you can see there's a lot more of the follicular cells than there are the parafollicular cells. There's a lot more of the thyroid hormones, they're called T3 and T4, being released than there is of the calcitonin. So, yeah, Ava? C is just like the inside of the follicle, like kind of the chamber where all of it's stored until it's ready to be released. Yeah, good question. Okay, other questions? Okay, so the thyroid hormones. So there's T3 and T4, okay? And they're really just called that based on how many iodine molecules are found in them. Okay, so triiodothyronine and tetraiodothyronine are the two. T4 is also called thyroxine, and they're both modified versions of the amino acid thyrionine. Okay, so it's just this amino acid with some additional molecules on it, including iodine. Okay, so where do we get iodine in our diet? You guys know? Somebody said fish, I think. Yeah, so fish for sure. Salt, yeah, most of the salt you'll see on the next slide. A lot of the salt that we have in our house is iodized, right? So if you see that iodized on there, then that means there's been iodine added to the sodium chloride that's normally in salt. Okay, and so yeah, but really things from the sea, from the ocean. So it could be seaweed, could be fish, could be other products from the ocean. And so yeah, so ocean products, fish, shellfish, seaweed, and table salt. We'll talk in just a sec about what happens when we don't get enough iodine, but that is a problem in developing countries that aren't on the ocean. Ones that are on the ocean aren't a problem because they have plenty of fish in their diet, but ones that aren't on the ocean, it can be a major problem. Okay, questions on this? Okay. All right, so let's look at the kind of full hormone loop here. Okay, so thyroid hormones are incredibly important, absolutely essential for life. And so the stimulus to release them would be one, just low levels of these of T3 and T4. Okay. This is one of those hormones that we just always need some in our blood. So as soon as they start dipping, that stimulates us to release more of T3 and T4. And then the other big one is exposure to cold. Okay, because the thyroid hormones cause us to increase our metabolism. And so when we increase our metabolism, we warm up, right? And so cold exposure makes us release some of this, and we increase metabolism, that warms our bodies up. And so that's kind of the number one action here is increase metabolism, increase mitochondrial activity, increase protein synthesis, and very important for neural development as well. And so the number one cause of mental retardation across the world is low iodine in the diet, because if you don't have enough iodine, then you're not making the thyroid hormones, and that delays neural development and changes neural development in kids. All right. Yeah, and then let's just look at the kind of loop here, right? So we got the stimulus, we got a hypothalamic hormone. In this case, this is the one that I want you to know, right? So that's TRH coming from the hypothalamus. That goes to the pituitary, anterior pituitary, causes the release of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That thyroid stimulating hormone then goes to the thyroid gland and causes the release of T3 and T4. Okay, and then we've got these actions here. And so you can see the negative feedback comes from T3 and T4 itself, right? So that goes back to the pituitary and back to the hypothalamus and causes the inhibition of the release of TRH and TSH when we have enough of the T3 and T4. Okay, questions on that? No, it's just kind of the way that the arrow was drawn, but yeah, to the anterior. Yeah, other questions? Yeah, right.
Much PSH.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some examples of that in just a sec. And if you still have more questions after, then let me know. But okay, so we can have hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Okay, so hypothyroidism, cause of hypothyroidism could be low TSH. Okay, so for some reason your pituitary is not releasing enough TSH, or it could be that the thyroid gland itself is damaged for some reason. Okay, or it could be low iodine intake. And so if we don't have enough iodine, we can't make those hormones, and we can't produce the hormones. And so we have a hypothyroidism just really means low levels of the thyroid hormones. Okay. So the symptoms related to this are just everything having to do with kind of decreasing metabolism. So patients feel weak, they get tired easily, they're constantly cold, they're not warm enough, they gain weight, and potentially could have a goiter if the problem was due to low iodine. Okay. If this happens during development, as I already mentioned, this is the most common cause of mental retardation in the world. Okay, so take a sec with your team and think about that question up there in the upper right. Okay, walk through that question and decide why you think the goiter would be caused here. And you can send that in on your clickers when you're ready.
Yeah.
It's got it all figured out. Yeah. Of course it is.
I see, Dr.
Oh, true. Yeah.
You were saying after spring break, you guys were probably gonna.
Yeah, I think that's what's gonna happen. Yeah. I texted him after he asked me that one day, and then he said, how about after spring break? I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Good. Glad to talk to him about. You gonna go hit it up tomorrow, 8 to 10?
So,
8 to 10 feet tomorrow. You gonna go surf? Look, that's smart. Yeah. There you go. All right, send it in if you haven't yet.
How long would it take for it to like? Not more?
That's a great question. That large would be years for sure. Yeah, yeah. But to maybe have it noticeable, it could be, it's not quick, so it could be like a matter of months, typically, but. No, it's the cells themselves. It's just producing more of those follicular cells. Yeah, it's just like, just getting larger. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. So about 2/3 of you are saying D is the answer. Okay. And so the deal is the negative feedback. Let's go back to the slide that shows it. The negative feedback is caused by the hormones themselves, right? And what do we know about TSH that is important with all of this? Okay, it'll only be inhibited by the T3 and T4, okay? But what else about it? It's a tropic hormone. We know that because it causes another hormone to be released, but what other kind of hormone is it also? Trophic hormone, right? That's the other key part, is it causes the growth of the gland that it binds to, right? And so it's not that we're releasing too much TSH. The amount of TSH is appropriate with the level of negative feedback that we have, right? It's just that we don't have negative feedback because the hormones aren't being produced, right? And so if we can't make these, then we should keep releasing TSH because there's low levels of T3 and T4, right? But that makes us keep releasing TSH. So just lots and lots of TSH. So these cells just divide and grow, and that's really what it is. The thyroid itself just gets larger. It's not like a fluid buildup, it's the gland just gets bigger. And that's obviously a very massive one in the picture, but when you search Google image for stuff, you get extreme cases, but a lot of times it's just like a small bump, you know. But yeah. So questions about that? Okay, so goiters show up in a few different places. Back in Jesus's time, most shepherds were known to have goiters because they were poor, they didn't have a very good diet, and so when you look at a lot of like famous artwork in old cathedrals, you'll see that. So if you zoom in on a certain spot of that image there, you can see these big goiters depicted in the shepherds there, and so that was somewhat common. Also shows up in with Rapunzel here. And yeah, that song, I think that's the song where they're like in the bar, right? And they're like, yeah, entangled. Yeah, he's got a goiter as well. So yeah, but questions about that at all? Okay, so then the other side of things with the thyroid gland would be if we have too much T3 and T4 release. Okay, so hyperthyroidism, this can be caused by a pituitary tumor. Okay, so if the pituitary tumor is in the cells that make TSH, then we can just be pumping out way too much TSH, right? And then a lot of times those cells don't respond to the negative feedback and they just keep releasing TSH and the thyroid grows. Okay, so that's another cause of a goiter. So it doesn't just have to be low iodine. You can have it with this. A thyroid tumor is another option. We're just making too much T3 and T4. Nothing to do with pituitary up above, but just too much T3 and T4. Graves' disease is an autoimmune disorder where it's kind of your body kind of attacks a lot of different connective tissues throughout your body, but it also stimulates more production of T3 and T4. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is another one I don't have on this slide, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, where it kind of starts with hyperthyroidism, and then eventually, once the thyroid is kind of destroyed, then it goes into hypothyroidism after that. So symptoms of this hyperthyroidism are just kind of the opposite. So weight loss instead of weight gain, hot, sweaty, rapid heart rate, nervousness. And then if it's Graves' disease, there'll be this kind of characteristic sign of kind of these bulging eyes because the connective tissue behind the eyes gets damaged and kind of gets scar tissue there that pushes the eyeballs forward. So usually it's just going to be removing the tumor if it's caused by one of these tumors. And then a lot of times you have to supplement the thyroid hormones for life, which is a common thing. So people that hypothyroidism is somewhat common, and then people take thyroid medication, and that's somewhat common. And so that's also the case if the thyroid needs to be removed. Yeah, Ava?
Also, like, that's not the ice cream bugging out, or
It's kind of a separate issue, really. That's the Yeah, it's really that Graves' disease is about destroying connective tissue all throughout your body, which also ends up affecting your thyroid gland. But it's a separate thing that the eyeballs bulge, so it's more about treating the inflammation caused by the inflammatory disorder that can help with the eye thing. But the eye thing is just kind of connected to it, so it's a kind of sign of that might be what's going on. Yeah, Kieran?
That treat also for the two tears, or just for the Graves' disease?
This treatment here, this would just be for the two tumor ones. Graves' disease is a totally different treatment. Yeah, more about suppressing inflammation. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Okay, so then the other hormone that's released by the thyroid gland is calcitonin. And so calcitonin is released from those parafollicular cells instead of the follicular cells in the thyroid, and it's released as stimulated by high blood calcium levels. Okay, so when blood calcium levels are elevated, that stimulates the release of calcitonin. And what it does, it stimulates osteoblastic activity. Okay, so this was something from last semester. You guys remember we had osteoblasts in our bone. We have osteoclasts, right? And then osteocytes as well. The osteoblasts do what? What do they do for our bones? Make bone, right? Yeah, build bone, right? And so we're stimulating osteoblastic activity. That would make sense because we're going to take the calcium out of the blood and put it into the bone, right? So that'll help us lower our calcium levels. And then it does the opposite with the osteoclasts. It inhibits their activity because osteoclasts pull calcium out of bone, right? And put it into blood. So we wouldn't want that happening. Okay, so the end result is we lower calcium levels. Interestingly enough, though, calcitonin isn't really needed in humans. So when somebody has their thyroid gland removed, you don't have to give them calcitonin. They're just fine without it. And we'll see in a sec. It's because the parathyroid gland releases another one that really regulates calcium levels. So that's next. So the parathyroid gland is again just these little collections of tissue kind of on the back of the thyroid in four different spots. And it was discovered completely on accident when somebody had their thyroid removed. They didn't even know that these other little pockets of tissue were there, and the patients would die. They're replacing their thyroid hormones, they're dealing with that part, but their calcium levels get completely out of whack. So the parathyroid hormone that's released by these is essential for life to keep calcium levels stable. And so that's how it was initially discovered. And so its release is stimulated by the opposite of what we just said with calcitonin, which is low blood calcium now instead of high. And so the actions are going to be the opposite as well. So it stimulates the osteoclasts to do their job and inhibits the osteoblasts to do their job. It also increases calcium uptake in the GI tract. Okay, so stimulated by low blood calcium, it's going to make our osteoclasts work. So those are going to break down bone, pull calcium out and put it into the blood, and then stop the osteoblasts from doing their job, which would be taking calcium out of the blood and putting it into bone. So the end result is increases in blood calcium levels, but also a little bit of a decrease in bone calcium. Okay, questions on that so far? Okay, go ahead and just kind of walk through this. You can kind of fill in this chart here. I would recommend just starting here. Okay, this is talking about calcium homeostasis. So this is what happens when there's too high of blood calcium, right? Which hormones released, what actions do we see, and then what's the end result? And then this is the opposite way. When blood calcium is too low, what do we see going on there? Okay, so go ahead, fill that in, and you can send in your answer to this question on your clickers. Go ahead and check in with your team on what you got there as well.
It's in black and white. So I got my blood tested like 3 months ago, and they tested my TSH, and it was like low-ish. They just need to eat more fish,
No, that's it.
or like, and then, well, I don't know. They didn't really say
They
anything.
didn't
They
say.
just said that it looks fine, but it's like
Yeah. Interesting.
why would they test for that?
Were you just getting like a regular like checkup? Or?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. It might just be common. Yeah. Could have something to do with just like I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know exactly what it would. Might just be part of the normal blood panel, but I'm not sure. Yeah. 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 All right. Go ahead and send in that answer there. All right, I'll leave it open for a sec, but let's start working through it here. So we'll start over there on the left. So when we have too high of blood calcium, that's going to lead to the thyroid gland releasing calcitonin. Right, that calcitonin is going to cause our osteoblasts to take some of that calcium from the blood, put it into the bone. Okay, that's kind of our response there. And then on the other side, if our calcium levels are too low, okay, that's going to cause our parathyroid glands to release parathyroid hormone, which then that causes our osteoclasts to do their job, degrade bone, kind of free up calcium and put that into the blood so it raises our blood calcium levels back up. Okay, so then as far as the question goes, most of you said A. Okay, so what would inhibit parathyroid hormone release? It would be when our blood calcium levels go back up, right? So when this moves back up in this direction, then we would decrease the release of parathyroid hormone. Give you a sec to finish writing that down, but any questions on this? And if you're done with this, you can flip to the next page. There's a clicker question there as well for you to take a look at. Go ahead and chat about that one with your team and send in all the answers that are correct there. I'll give you another sec on this slide though, for those of you that are perfectionists and didn't write anything down until I uncovered the answers. Right? Yeah, exactly.
Question. These are during development, so that like when
Fetal development mainly, but also real young.
in the mother's stomach.
Yeah, that, but then also as a kid too.
And it could just develop well, growing up.
Yeah, they just like their brain is not developing properly. Yeah.
Thank
So, mhm.
Oh, right.
All right, go ahead and send in all the answers that are true there. Make sure to hit the send button. All right, everybody just go ahead and hit send. I've not seen a lot of your answers for some reason. Everybody just hit send just to make sure. Okay. All right. So yeah, let's walk through this here. So we've got the first one would be a decrease in body temperature. Okay, cold exposure. Second one would be low T4. Third one would be low T3. Okay, so those are the three there that would be correct. So just remember with all of these hormone kind of flow charts and loops, you got to know the stimulus for that starts the whole thing, and it's just an example of that. Okay. All right. Questions on any of that? Okay, so let's move on to the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland, also known as the suprarenal gland, sits on top of our kidneys, right? There's one on each side. There's two parts to it. The cortex is the outer part. Cortex is endocrine tissue. Okay, and then there's the medulla, which is the inner part, which is part of our sympathetic nervous system, right? And so this has neurons in it. They're going to be releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine into the blood in response to stress. All right, and so we'll talk about um, mostly just the cortex part today because we've already talked about the sympathetic nervous system part. Give you a sec to finish writing that down. Okay, looks like most of you got it. All right, so let's talk about the hormones that the adrenal gland releases. Okay, so the adrenal cortex produces and releases over 12 different hormones. Okay, so a very important part of our endocrine system. But there's three kind of classes to those. So the first class is called the mineral corticoids. This one is primarily aldosterone. Its function is to control mineral levels in our blood, mostly sodium and potassium. Okay, then we have the glucocorticoids. This includes cortisol being the most important one. So this controls blood glucose levels as well as helps control our metabolism. And then we have the gonatocorticoids, which are also known as androgens. The primary one is called DHEA. And this one can be converted into estrogen or testosterone after it enters the blood. And so this a lot of times is the some version of DHEA is what a lot of athletes take for performance enhancing drugs because testosterone is too easy to detect in blood tests, but other kind of precursors to testosterone like DHEA is a little bit harder to detect. And so there's all different versions of this that athletes use to try to get stronger, right? Because androgens are anabolic hormones and make you form muscle mass if you're lifting. So yeah, but then also kind of driving sex specific characteristics as well. Okay. Yeah, Jesse.
As detectable as just taking testosterone.
Yeah, it just has to do with the drug testing kind of industry and the types of drug tests that are available. And so like initially when this was even started as a thing to take steroids was like the what people would call it, right? That meant taking pure testosterone. And so then the drug testing industry like, all right, we got to come up with tests for detecting pure testosterone, right? And then those people would get caught. So then the people coming up with these drugs came up with different versions of testosterone that were undetectable by those drugs, or by those drug testing kits, right? And so then the drug testing industry is kind of always a little bit behind the actual people who are making the drugs to sell to people. So it's just kind of a constant like game of cat and mouse, pretty much. Yeah. So like if you go back to the kind of famous home run battle between Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire. I don't know if anybody knows about that, but that was kind of the most home runs have ever been hit. I think it was Sammy Sosa, like a 71 or something in a year. But all of those guys were taking some version of this at that point, and they all got caught for it eventually. But yeah, they all got much bigger too. If you see like their rookie photos versus their photos when they were doing that, they're all like twice the size and much bigger. So yeah, but that's kind of the whole performance enhancing drug thing, specifically for the steroid part, which steroids doesn't necessarily just mean testosterone, but that's just kind of how we've used it. Aldosterone's a steroid, cortisol's a steroid as well. But yeah. DHEA. Yeah, so do I still have a slide? I guess I don't. Yeah, it's the spelled out word is dehydro uh yeah, it's a super long one. I could try to spell it out if you want. But yeah, you don't need to know it, but it's just a very long like chemical word pretty much. Androstenedione is the other one that's similar to this. It's just a precursor to testosterone and estrogen. Yeah. So good. Other questions? Okay, so let's start with cortisol. So cortisol is a steroid hormone as well, which just means it's made out of cholesterol. Okay, and so its big thing is to help us respond to stress. Right, this is our primary stress response hormone, um, and so we receive some kind of stress that causes the hypothalamus to release its hormone, which is CRH, but you don't need to know that one. And then that CRH causes the release of ACTH from the pituitary. That's the one we talked about last time. Right? And that ACTH then causes the adrenal gland to release cortisol. And that's the negative feedback as well as the cortisol levels to the hypothalamus. And its actions are it causes our blood sugar to increase, but this one's a catabolic hormone, meaning that it doesn't cause growth, it causes breakdown of tissue. Right? How many people have had a cortisone injection in an injury? Is anybody? Yeah, yeah. So that's what this is, right? There's a synthetic version of that. What you got was a synthetic version of this hormone cortisol, and it has a strong anti-inflammatory effect, right? So that's why we use it in that way. But if you get too many of them in a short period of time in one spot, then your tissue starts degrading, right? And so when like certain athletes, when they do things like tear, like one of the Padres pitchers last year, tore his patellar tendon, right? And that's not really that common. So I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that he probably had kind of chronic tendonitis in that knee for a long time, maybe some cortisone injections as well, because then the tendon starts thinning out and then it can tear a lot easier when you have all those cortisone injections. So yeah, Kieran, go ahead.
But I guess
Yeah, so if all of a sudden we have a big drop in cortisone levels, then we don't survive very long. Yeah, so it maintains our blood glucose levels, one of the important things that we have to have it for. So yeah, and so Cushing's disease can be caused by an ACTH releasing pituitary tumor, right? So pituitary glands releasing too much ACTH, and so then we get an overdose of cortisone. And this leads to all kinds of things. Leads to this kind of deposition of fat on the back, which is called the buffalo hump, high blood sugar, and then muscle and bone wasting because of the catabolic effects of cortisol. Okay. All right. So this one kind of walks us through the flow chart with cortisol. We can do this one together. So the stimulus for release here, there's a bunch. Okay. So we have kind of a circadian rhythm for the release of cortisol. I already mentioned that. The waking up is really stressful on our body. So if we're in somewhat of a regular sleep schedule, then a little bit before the time we're set to wake up, we'll get a cortisol spike in our blood. And that increases our blood sugar. It kind of activates our brain for being awake and kind of gets everything moving. And so that's kind of the morning hours one. Stress is causing the release of it. And then sympathetic nervous system activity also causes the release of cortisol as well. And so in that case, the hypothalamus is going to secrete a hormone, the CRH, right? That's going to lead to the release of ACTH from from the anterior pituitary, and then the adrenal gland releases cortisol. And then we see all those different effects. So we're kind of releasing. One way to think about what cortisol does for our metabolism is it just mobilizes a bunch of fuel. Right? So we're increasing glucose, we're breaking down fat, we're breaking down protein, and we can use all of that as fuel. So it's like fuel mobilization is kind of the best way to look at it, because that's what we need when we're under stress. We need to have fuel available so we can use that to do whatever we need to do to kind of avoid that stress or work through that stress. Right? And so then the negative feedback is from the cortisol itself here to go up to both the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Okay. Questions on that? Yeah, go ahead. Don't need to know what? Yeah, the only hypothalamic hormone you need to know is the one related to the thyroid hormone. Okay. All right. Then the other one here, from the adrenal gland is aldosterone. Okay. It's also a steroid. Okay. So the stimuli for release, number one would be low blood pressure or low blood volume. When that happens, that's sensed by our kidneys, and then our kidneys release an enzyme called renin. Renin is going to then cause the formation of angiotensin 2, which is another hormone that will stimulate the release of aldosterone. So that's kind of one long stimuli, but that's part of it, is that angiotensin 2. When we have high blood potassium levels, that causes the release of aldosterone. And stress related to the whole ACTH pathway we're just talking about with cortisol also causes the release of aldosterone. Okay, so its actions include increasing sodium and water absorption in the kidneys. So we're pulling sodium and water back out of the urine, so we hold on to it more. Okay, and then we get rid of more potassium. We put more potassium into the blood, or into the urine, I mean. And so the end result of this is we increase our blood pressure and we increase our blood volume. So next time you hear somebody taking steroids, you can say, "Oh yeah, you're taking aldosterone again." Yeah, it's good. Everybody just calls them steroids, but they're really talking about testosterone, but there's a lot of other steroids. So, okay, questions on this? Give you another sec. Too many things to write down on these slides, huh? Okay. We good? We got it? Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the kind of flow chart here for aldosterone release. Okay, so again, we've got those three different stimuli. Okay, so the first one would be the kidneys are sensing low blood volume or low blood pressure. Okay, that's going to cause the kidneys to release renin. Renin is just an enzyme, really, and that enzyme is going to lead to the formation of angiotensin 2, which is a very powerful hormone for regulating our blood pressure. One of the ways it regulates our blood pressure is that it goes to the adrenal gland and causes the release of aldosterone. Okay, so that's like stimulus number one. Low blood volume, renin, angiotensin 2, and then release of aldosterone. Next one is high potassium levels in the blood. High potassium will directly cause the adrenal gland to release aldosterone. And then the last one is the pathway that we've already looked at with cortisol, which is stress, which leads to the hypothalamus releasing its hormone, which then leads to the pituitary releasing ACTH. And so ACTH causes the release of both aldosterone and cortisol from the adrenal gland. Okay, so then the kidneys are going to absorb more sodium, keep it in the body, not let it leave in the urine, but then they're going to get rid of more potassium. And along with the sodium comes water, so that helps us hang on to water too. And so then the end result of that is we get increase in blood volume and an increase in blood pressure. So the angiotensin 2, just a couple more things on that. As I said, it's a very powerful modulator of our blood pressure. And so I'm guessing some of your parents are on a drug called lisinopril or something like that that ends with an ill. It's because what it does is it blocks the formation of angiotensin 2. Okay, we'll talk more about the specifics of that when we get to the kidneys. But angiotensin 2 does all kinds of stuff. So it causes us to release aldosterone, like we are just talking about. It also causes us to release ADH, also causes vasoconstriction, and also activates our sympathetic nervous system. So all of these things lead to increases in blood pressure, right? So if there's a drug that blocks this, then that decreases our blood pressure quite a bit. So most hypertensive patients are on some form of an ACE inhibitor, it's called, but it blocks the formation of angiotensin 2. Okay. Questions on that? Yeah, Isabel? Later, when we get to the kidneys, I'll give you the rest of the story later. Not for this, not for right now. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Okay, then just a couple more glands here. So the pineal gland, we've already talked about, it kind of sits right at the center of the brain. So because of that, it has all this kind of like lore around it, that it's like the center of your soul and all these things. Yeah, certain cultures think of it as like the seat of the soul or the third eye. But it's this little thing, it's about the size of a grain of rice, kind of pine cone shaped. And it's directly connected to the retina via the hypothalamus. And so it's constantly receiving information about light and dark. So when you're outside and you receive sunlight, your retinas are obviously getting that information. That sends information back to the pineal gland, and then the pineal gland will release melatonin. And so it's stimulated by bright light during the day, and its function is to cause, melatonin's function is to cause cortisol release in the morning. So this is problematic for places like Alaska in the winter when there's no sunlight at all. They kind of have disruptions in their melatonin release. This is also the same thing that you can take to help you sleep, right? How many people have taken melatonin before to help you sleep? Yeah, so it's the same idea. Okay, got that? All right, and then the last gland here is the thymus. Thymus is just a little bit further down the trachea, kind of over the bronchus, between the lungs, and this is really immune tissue. It's much bigger in kids than it is in adults. It releases a hormone called thymosin, and thymosin kind of activates our immune system and helps us to stimulate and develop our immune system. So very important in the development of immunity in kids. Okay, and we can kind of walk. I can just give you the answers to this because we're out of time. So which of the following directly stimulate the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone? Okay, so we just walked through them. One of those would be high blood potassium. The other one would be angiotensin 2. And then the last one would be ACTH, right? And so, yeah, those are the three stimuli. Okay. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.